Okay, let's go.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel Ayaz Vlog CSS. Today we are diving into the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the events that sparked this crisis. The story begins with the disintegration of the USSR. Ukraine became free like many other states. From 1991 to 2000, Russian influence was receding in Europe until the rise of Putin in May 2000. Putin's major objective was to resurrect Russia as a successor to the USSR. In the post-Yeltsin era, Putin tried to establish his clout using a mix of force and diplomacy to deter former Soviet Union states from joining NATO or the Western Bloc. But his rage became furious, especially after the Bucharest summit of NATO. Before the 2008 NATO summit in Bucharest, Romania, Vladimir Putin had been working to undermine Ukraine's sovereignty. In 2006, Russia cut off gas supplies to Ukraine, citing a pricing dispute which many saw as an attempt to exert pressure on the Ukraine's government. Putin also repeatedly questioned Ukraine's territorial integrity and nationhood, fueling tensions between the two countries. Meanwhile, the US had plans to install a missile defense system in Poland and the Czech Republic, which Russia saw as a threat to its national security. The proposed missile shield was intended to protect Europe from the potential Iranian missile attacks, but Russia viewed it as a strategic threat. Putin warned that the deployment would lead to serious consequences, including the potential deployment of short-range missiles in Kaliningrad or elsewhere in Europe. However, in 2009, US President Barack Obama cancelled the plans for the missile shield in Poland and Czech Republic, opting instead for a different approach to missile defense. Despite this development, tensions between Russia and Ukraine continued to surge and multiply. In April 2008, the NATO summit in Bucharest played a trigger in the lead up to the Euromaidan protests. Ukraine and Georgia, both seeking closer ties with the West, bid for NATO membership action plans. However, NATO members Germany and France, backed by the UK, opposed granting MAP status to Ukraine and Georgia, fearing it would antagonize Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin made it clear that Ukraine's bid for NATO membership, which was formerly part of USSR, was not acceptable, even going so far as to say that Ukraine was not a real nation state. Russia's opposition to NATO expansion in Eastern Europe was not just about security concerns, but also about maintaining its influence in the region. When Georgia did not receive MAP status, Russia saw it as an opportunity to assert its dominance. A few months later, Russia invaded Georgia, citing protection of its citizens in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. In November 2013, Ukraine was on the cusp of signing an association agreement with the European Union, a move that would have brought the country closer to the EU and potentially opened up new economic and political opportunities. However, then President Viktor Yanukovych suddenly suspended talks, opting instead to strengthen ties with Russia. This decision sparked widespread protests in Kyiv's Independence Square, known as Euromaidan. The protesters were a diverse group of Ukrainians, including students, activists, civil society members, and opposition politicians. They were united by their desire for a more democratic and European future of Ukraine. Many saw the association agreement with the EU as a way to modernize the country, increase transparency, and reduce corruption. Yanukovych's decisions to suspend talks with the EU was widely seen as a response to pressure from Russia, which had offered Ukraine huge economic incentives to maintain its ties with Moscow. However, this move was deeply unpopular among many Ukrainians, who saw it as a betrayal of their aspirations for a more European future. The protests escalated over the coming months, with clashes between protesters and government forces becoming increasingly violent. The movement ultimately culminated in Yanukovych's ouster and the formation of a new government, which would go on to sign the association agreement with the EU. But this victory was to bring the worst, which we will explain in part 2 of this Russia Ukraine tug of war.